Okay, welcome everyone to this session all about land agreements tonight. I'm really excited to be joined by Harry and Fred, who I'll introduce in just a minute. It's wonderful to have both land matching organisations come onto this call and give you some great advice about the differences between land agreements. So, as you know, a land agreement is going to be the final part of your process if you're working towards land match. And it's going to be a really vital thing to get right. So this is a very explorative session. Any questions we're going to answer throughout. You're very welcome to submit things in the chat. And if you're watching the recording back, we'll try and say as many things out loud as we can to make that super clear. First of all, I'm going to give a little bit of an introduction about Land Match England and who we are for the people who don't know us or who are new. So we are a not-for-profit land matching service who have been worked up from development stage of many different organisations working in partnership who saw a gap for land matching for access to land in England. We wanted to create a service that helped match up people looking for land with people who have land but want to make it more productive. And we've been working with different types of people. Our approach tends to be we're working with people who are doing agroecology, and we're working on quite a small scale basis, just connecting people and supporting people with that relationship building primarily. Things that we offer as a service. So we are an organisation that bases most of our approach on that one-to-one support and personality matching. It's a really key part of what we do, and we're really trying to make sure that people have, shared goals and they're able to connect on that sort of level. We accept any sorts of people, any types of farming. So a lot of people we work with are market gardeners and they're searching for people doing market gardening. But it's not only that, it's also livestock, it's also, different sorts of systems, it's agroecological forestry, small plant nurseries that have an agroecological approach, any different sorts of businesses that are nature friendly we're looking to support. And we also have some really, really great resources, lots of which have been made in collaboration with Harry, who's on the call today. So yeah, just trying to gather as many bits and bobs from different organizations that have been created to give you the best advice possible. And it's really great today that we're on this call together and just pooling the different skill sets that we have. So I'll introduce them in just a second. What's my final bit? The regional support that we have. So we're regionally based as a Land Match England organisation. I'm based up in the northwest in Kendal, but we support people throughout England. We have a coordinator in the southwest and southeast as well that covers the east of England too. I've just put our website on there for anyone who doesn't have it, although I'm sure you probably have, and a get in touch email too. You're welcome to send us a question at any time. I think I'm going to stop sharing and just let you open up the room and see who's on the call. Stop it there. Great. So I'm going to pass over to Fred from Abunda. Abunda is another land matching service operating throughout England and also throughout Scotland, I believe. Please do add if there's any other regions that I've forgotten. But they are also another great organisation who are doing lots of work to get people's opportunities out there. So they have a range of different skill sets. They have some more specialisms that we don't have within our small team. So we're really happy to be working with them today. And yeah, we have lots of people who are looking for land with both organisations. We're both doing a similar sort of thing with a different sort of skill set. One of their skill sets tonight is all about land agreements. So I'm really, really glad that they're here to advise and share some information that I don't even currently have. So really looking forward to learning from you guys. I'll pass you over if you want to take the floor, Fred.
Yeah, thank you. You can all see my screen, right?
Yes.
Just to double check.
Cool.
Right. So which land agreement is right for me or for you watching this? Thank you for inviting us on this call, Cordelia. We're as you mentioned, we're quite happily working closely together with Landmatch England, and we have lots of landholders and land seekers who are effectively working with both of us. So it's one of those things where collaboration really makes sense. Today's menu is we're going to say hello, which we are kind of already getting started with. We'll talk a little bit about giving you just a brief overview of the typical agreement types. we'll dig a little bit into what's needed to really understand what's relevant, so what's your context, and then we'll do an agreement types walkthrough, and we'll follow up with a bit of a summary, and we can discuss it as well to get some more nuances in there. So let's start by saying hello. Nice to meet you. Um, I'm joined
Hello.
I'm joined today by my co-founder Harry. Um, just so we can sort of understand who's or you can understand who's in the room. I'm Fred. I work in the UK. I'm from Denmark, and my background is in economics, and I've had a few startups, etc., and been focusing on regenerative farm finance for quite a while now. In Abunda, I'm the farm finance lead, so I do all the numbers, I do all the spreadsheets, and as Harry liked to say, I make sexy spreadsheets. So maybe Harry, you can do your part.
Yeah, absolutely. Great to be here, guys. Really exciting. And yeah, thanks, Cordelia, for collaborating with us. The journey goes on. As you can see, Fred made the slides, and I am dubbed the annoying legal guy, which hopefully today I can be less annoying and more enlightening as to where we're at. But yeah, farm strategy is my game, and legals come into that. But we're trying to do this all from a regenerative perspective. So we'll get into what that actually means a bit later on. Back to you, Fred.
Yeah. So we are perhaps less regional, if you will, than the Land Match England. We operate across the UK and in Ireland as well. So we are regenerative farming professionals with over a decade of experience in land agency, farm finance, and psychology as well. We'll get to that. So we help farmers effectively from the very first idea all the way to 10 years of successful farming partnerships with everything that is part of that.
Can
So.
I can I just chip in there? I think it's really important because we've got quite a lot of land seekers in the room.
Mhm.
Um, we charge the landholder, so we're very hands-on. But any land seekers interacting with us, you'll never be charged a penny, and that's because you guys are the solution. So just wanted to chuck that in there.
Very nice. Thank you. So how we tend to work, the most important thing for Abunda is to bring clarity and confidence to farm partnerships. And so we are people-centered, meaning that if the personal side doesn't work, nothing will work. So we support that quite a bit. Yeah, we are regen professionals, but that means also we apply principles of the holistic management framework. And some of you might be familiar with that, but we're going to talk a little bit more about that in just a minute. And then we also host a fairly large network of farmers looking for land partners on both sides. And so we tend to understand exactly what they need. So usually we're able to put people in the right contact. Um, this is on the left side is another crucial part of our team. Her name is Hattie. She's a therapist, and some people think, well, a therapist and farming is quite unusual. But actually, when we started this out, we realized that most of the farming partnerships that we came across that had not lasted was because people fell out. So we really wanted to make sure that we had a way to support constructive conflict management and values alignment and let's say managing expectations up front. And for that, it's really important to understand oneself and each other. And there's no better than working with someone who understands psychology quite well. And so that's one part that we add. And she used to be our secret weapon, but she did a session now at Groundswell, so I think we can't call her a secret anymore. Um, this other sign here that you see, it stands for Creative Commons, which is an open source licensing framework. And the reason why it's there is because we tend to share as many resources as we can openly and collaboratively. And as you can see, we're collaborating here with colleagues rather than competitors in Land England. So yeah, we're sticking to being open and collaborative. Um, and so just a quick overview of who we are working with in the team. It's Harry and I, and it's Hetty, and we do have a rural planning consultant associated with it, and also two more land agents with each their speciality. Um, now, in terms of just kind of getting us started, the bridge towards talking about agreements and understanding how a funder works, etc., is a good place to start in the process. This is our process. I'm sure that Land Match England has a somewhat similar setup, but we start with a consultation, which is free. We do a holistic scoping where we also use the holistic management framework. And then we start to define the opportunity. So we start prepare, match, agree. And when in this whole process from initial consultation to actually agreeing the terms, do the agreement come into play? Well, they kind of come into play at different stages. In the beginning, we understand what is the scope of types of agreement that is relevant here. So we tend to not be very firm upfront about it has to be a contract farming agreement or it has to be a tenancy, etc. Often we figure that out when we've found the right partner, etc., down the line. So you can see when we come down to the whiteboard sessions, which effectively is a session we do to co-create a plan between a land seeker and a landholder. This is where you sort of put the agreement assumptions that we had initially to the test. Will this also work in this context? Then, of course, it's decided upon once you have agreed the terms on the plan, and only then do you actually write it, right? So just to be clear, our general approach to agreements is first get the full picture, meaning the context, scope out what types of agreement are relevant, stress test the plan and compatibility with relating to how and which agreement should be made. But then we think it's really important to set out the terms in plain English first, so heads of terms effectively, and then we write a legal agreement because that avoids a lot of different confusion along the road. And also is a good instruction for any legal person making the legal agreement, which doesn't have to be us. It could be others. Let's say if someone has another land agent and someone that they used to work with, it's perfectly fine. So we're not precious about that. Okay, now to set us off in terms of the different types of agreement, we like to simplify things a little bit, and then we're going to draw out the nuance afterwards. So in terms of types of agreements, let's think about it in this way. It's effectively a continuum of, as a landholder, how much risk and reward would you like to take? And the other way, of course, the land seeker, how much risk/reward would you like to take? So all the way from employment, these are the typical agreements that we're seeing. There's of course others. We can discuss that in a bit, but typically we find employment, contract farming. There's of course a concept of share farming, which we also will discuss. Then joint venture, which is setting up a separate company together effectively. And then you have tenancy alliances that we, for the purpose of this call, have sort of grouped a little bit together for this overview. And of course, whenever you make a simplification, you lose a bit of nuance and so on. But just, this is a good way of sort of starting to think about different types of agreement. The further, as a landholder, you go from left to right, the further you go, the less risk you take effectively. And of course, the less reward you take, and vice versa. As a land seeker, the further you go from right to left, the less risk and reward you're taking, right? So we always like to start by what's your context. In order to figure out what's relevant for you, you have to figure out what's your context. So starting with why. So why are you even doing land matching in the first place? Is it for diversification? Is this a succession case, or is it collaboration? Let's dig a little bit into that. So diversification, you are stacking typically a symbiotic farm enterprise on your farm, on your existing farm. This could be for many reasons. It can be to upgrade the profitability of your farm. It can be you want to grow your farm operations without having an extra management burden, etc. You want to strengthen your weak spots with a stable long-term partner, etc. Right? There are many different reasons, but it's important to make clear what is the core reason here, and just because that's going to also guide the rest of the conversation in a land match, but also specifically for the agreement. Succession, sticking to your purpose and the values of the farm while stepping back from day to day. It's often important to protect the legacy with a partner who shares our values, etc. And in here also comes often even things like tax situation and so on, which is super relevant as well. And of course, the third is collaboration. We've had a few of these cases where you actually have some farmers in the same region, fairly local to each other, who knew each other and wanted to formalize their collaboration and sometimes also invite someone else from the outside into to have a larger enterprise together that is greater than the sum of the parts effectively. So in all of these, it's quite important to set the boundaries early and just be quite clear about things.
And I think from a land seeker's perspective, because there's a couple of you guys on the call, it's also really helpful to understand where your pitch might fit in. Do
Mm.
you want to target a succession case? Or actually, are you, maybe you already have a small farm and you want to collaborate? We're talking more and more about a series of market gardens collaborating to take away some of the headaches so you can focus on doing the bit you love, aka growing. Or are you trying to get into a big farm that's already that you can stack an enterprise on, and all of that frames what you are bringing to the party? Just
Mm.
wanted to chip in with that.
Perfect. Thank you. Um, we'll just kind of skim over this, but just to for many landholders specifically, but also land seekers, just understanding are you actually ready for land matching? Sometimes it's a bit early when people approach us, for instance, and we have to kind of go a little bit back and say, okay, actually, there's these different things that's needed in order to be ready. It could be many different things. Maybe the vision is not clear enough. Maybe they're just kind of getting started in terms of figuring out how to go on their regenerative journey, etc. Right? So just to say, there is a bit of figuring out initially, often in terms of where are you on your journey, and of course we can support that. Of course, the how we came into land matching was actually from a farm region transition consultancy, and then Abunda came as a result of meeting the same problem over and over again, not having the right people to help. So, just to say, sometimes there's a little bit of initial support needed. Yeah, but just good to consider where are you actually ready for this? We'll get back to that. Um, those of you who are familiar with holistic management, you will know this almost by heart, I suppose. But this is just a bit of a list of things to think about as it relates to getting clarity on your part for your context. So defining the whole under management, which includes the decision makers, etc. Any commitments you have. Define the resource base. This is the land, etc. The source of money. Statement of purpose. Quality of life statements is actually often a fairly underestimated bit because it really emphasizes what kind of life do you really want to lead? How involved do you want to be with a new enterprise? Often there's a surprising answer for that. Forms of production, and of course, future resource base. What are you really looking to achieve in the future? We won't go too deep into this, but we're happy to elaborate afterwards. Harry, do you want to make a comment?
I do. If you guys missed our sessions at Groundswell, we went through this in a bit more detail, but the result of that was some really helpful worksheets that we are going to be publishing on our website, and we'll be inviting Landmatch England to publish as well. This is not something that we're precious about. This is something we just feel is really helpful for all you guys out there, and we want you to use it.
Perfect. Yeah, thanks for that. Uh, one of the elements of the holistic context that we like to put a bit more emphasis on because we think it's quite well, it's holistic, obviously, but also it draws out some of the bits that people often miss in terms of forms of capital. So, what do you really have to offer as a landholder or land seeker? It's not only just, well, capital, many people think of that in terms of, well, financial capital, money, savings, cash flow, etc. That's not the only type of capital that's really relevant, especially not for a land match. So it could be, your typical ones would be, financial, material, It can be also living, which is what kind of soil, fertility, etc. Do you have? What kind of diversity do you have already? Knowledge, what do you have to offer in terms of knowledge, skills, etc. But also cultural capital, traditions, heritage, something that people can identify with is actually that's fairly strong in many cases. And social, especially if you're getting a new land seeker onto your farm, um, that's quite important that there's some kind of social system, if you will, that they can tap into, especially if they're moving from afar. Otherwise, people might get lonely, etc. So these are the things that people don't always consider. And of course, we've got experiential and spiritual capital as well, which is also to not be disregarded. But we just want to emphasize this 8 forms of capital. We tend to use that quite often to draw out some of the things that people often take for granted about their own situation. What do they have to offer? But it also highlights what do I really need from another partner, right? Which is just as important. It will emphasize, the strengths and weaknesses often of any context.
And often parties won't bring that into sort of conventional types of agreements. But because we're here talking about regeneration of landscapes, and that includes communities and businesses, it's really helpful to understand what Fred's just articulated, because we can bring that through into legal agreements.
Yes. To make it a little bit more concrete as well, here are some sort of prompts to ask yourself to start to get more clarity. So, in terms of your vision, do you have a very precise and let's say set vision you really want to stick to, or is there some flexibility in there, right? How much control effectively would you like to have? What level of investment are you willing and able to make? What role do you want to have? How much input and control would you like to have in the new enterprise if you're bringing it on board? And also as a land seeker, how much control and security of tenure, etc., do you need to feel safe into going into something new in a daily life? What do you want to be doing? What do you not want to be doing? So this is something that also should be documented in an agreement, whether it's regardless of the type, effectively. Um, yeah, and what kind of outcomes are you looking for in terms of ecological outcomes, enterprise, community? What does success really look like? And also, the time horizon. What are we talking here? Is it do you want to do something for 5 years, 10 years? Is it a short? Uh, it's really important to be clear on that. Yeah, and what your preferences are on are you in a situation where you would like to continuously have a cash flow coming in, or can you invest whether in terms of financials or also in time? And and the last bit here around the non-negotiables is something that we often have to draw out of people because it's not always clear, and it's really important. And sometimes it can be easy to take for granted. Of course, someone wouldn't do X, Y, Z, but that is often what happens if you don't make it clear. Harry?
It's just really that point of understanding yourself so that you can represent yourself properly in what ultimately is a negotiation. And again, these prompts and the frameworks that we'll put on our website soon, through informed by holistic management and psychology, will really help you guys arrive at a negotiation knowing what you want, and also allowing the other side to know what they want, and therefore get an agreement that works for both of you.
Yeah. We'll skip this one because we already mentioned this. And then just if you're a landholder, there's a bit of a reality check that we'd like to propose. Just making sure, okay, ask yourself, are you ready if you find the right partner tomorrow? Is your family, partner, existing team ready for this too? Have you actually talked to them about it? Do you have actually vacant position of the land, or do you need to actually discuss that with someone? And if you're trying to expand or add buildings, etc., do you already have the planning consent secured? Do you have the financing or investment capacity in place, which often is needed, not always, of course. And in many cases, especially if it's a succession case, have you taken tax advice? It is really important. And depending on the enterprise that you want to set up, have you created the necessary trading structure? Yeah, so that's just it's a little bit of a reality check that we like to just prompt for. Uh, so far, so good. We're gonna go on in just a second to walk through some of the more the details of each type of agreement. Any questions so far? We'll give just a few. There's a thumbs up, which is always a good start. Um, and
Is that yeah, nice. So those thumbs up, hands up, where does that on
nice question.
So a little insight into me is that well Fred as you might be able to tell is based in Denmark. I'm based in Kenya, but both of our professional lives are in the UK. So people hear Abunda and they go, "Ooh, Abunda. Ah, that must be an African name." But actually it couldn't be further from the truth. Abunda really came from the inspiration of abundance. If we're going to regenerate our ecosystems, it starts from us feeling abundant, and the toolbox that we've sort of set out really starts that process. Yeah, would you add to that, Fred?
I mean, you did it pretty well. I just wanted to add maybe one thing is just in the context of land matching, for us, it's quite important that both sides are feeling abundant so that they know, okay, if for whatever reason one agreement doesn't end up working out, or they end up not making an agreement with one person, there are other opportunities out there. So that type of abundance, knowing, okay, there's going to be someone for me or some people for me out there regardless, and it's just a matter of applying a bit of patience sometimes, and not, let's say, going back on your non-negotiables.
Don't settle for second best because we're looking generally for long-term relationships, and speed is the wrong game to play.
Yeah,
Um,
I think someone once told me that speed is not a substitute for direction, and so we tend to we play by that off every day effectively. Harry, over to you.
Thanks. So you might guess that we are going to be talking about the annoying legal stuff now. I'll try and make it spicy. Let's go, Fred. Next slide, please. So, right, employment from a land seeker's perspective, you've got a contract, you've got a bunch of law that you can't contract out of. It's protecting you, it's determining that relationship. You've got rights to pensions, you've got an income every month. In some cases, you might have accommodation as part of that. That's a really secure way to start a partnership. A lot of people might say, well, wait a second, that's an employment contract. That's not a partnership. Well, actually, you're coming together to deliver something that you both believe in, right? So it's very much is a partnership, just maybe not in the classical sense. Again, so from a land seeker's perspective, you've got lots of protection from risk exposure. From a land holder's perspective, you've got control. So really, like we said, we're right at the end of that extreme of that sort of continuum that Fred so nicely articulated. Again, I think it's worth pointing out that you generally have quite low autonomy. But that said, I know people that actually love being employed because they have amazing managers and they really get autonomy within that. So again, we don't want to be attached to like these stigmas. It's a tool. In some cases, for example, we've looked at using employment to de-risk a relationship with the intention of going into a different legal relationship in the future, be that contract farming or a tenancy. Cool. Next slide. But guys, do chuck in any questions or things that you'd like us to debate as we go along. Right, contract farming is an agreement that falls under contract law. The result of that is it's incredibly flexible, most commonly associated with arable beef and dairy, but we're using it more and more for things like market gardening, and I think it has great potential for agroforestry. Again, it's really flexible, but really what you've got here is a landholder who is contracting a contractor to do the farming, whereas the parties both contribute things to this relationship. So generally speaking, the landowner is bringing land, infrastructure, maybe animals, etc. The land seeker is bringing the skills, the sort of the expertise, sort of that labor, and sometimes that's machinery as well. In the case of, for example, dairy, it's quite cool because you can have a third party investing, or it could be a joint investment by the farmer and the contractor to sort of co-own a herd or to co-own machinery, etc. This is quite popular for landowners because it shows that they are actively farming because they have quite a they have direct financial like risk exposure, which means that it's quite a tax efficient model from an inheritance tax perspective. Um, Again, we've seen these used incredibly well. We use them a lot ourselves, but equally, it's not right for everyone. And just taking a template off the shelf is often going to lead to problems if you don't go through the exercise that Fred shared earlier on. Great.
Mhm.
Anything else there? I
Uh,
mean, look, I would
just
just say that there's an entire document that summarizes these that we did with Land Match England on their website, and I think it was linked. Cordelia, I think you've already linked it into the, yeah. So
Yeah,
there's
it's me
more
a bit right
information
place.
there. Unless anybody is talking about this actively and wants to dive into more details, or Fred wants to chip in, I'll skim over them, and I'm sure there'll be a more relevant one that we can dig deeper into.
Yeah, the only thing I would add is just to say that not only is it, like you mentioned, possible for an outsider to actually inject capital, but actually both sides can inject money into this and get a return on capital, which is a percentage every year that you agree on, and it goes into an annual profit and loss settlement that divides the profits effectively between them. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. So it's yeah, as I said, it's an incredibly flexible model for that reason. And you can get the sort of rent from a landowner's perspective, albeit we call it different things. You can invest as a land seeker, you get a profit share, but you can also kind of get this fixed contractor's charge, which, if you like, is a bit like a salary. I think the last thing to mention, I probably should have started with this, is that the two parties are separate legal trading entities,
Yes.
right? And those two entities are coming together to produce something in a contractual relationship.
Mm.
Okay,
Yeah.
great. Next, please. Share farming. Okay, again, we've got two separate businesses coming together, but in this case, they're sharing inputs and outputs in a proportion. Okay, so an example might be like, hey, I've got some land, Fred's got some cattle. Why don't you graze your cattle on my land? And then for every cow you sell, you'll give me half of it for to simplify it. Um, Again, we've seen this work really well. Um, it's not that appropriate long term without a lot of careful consideration, because if you're not careful, you can create a legal trading partnership, and therefore it needs quite a lot of careful oversight. That said, it can be incredibly simple, and sometimes the simplest is the best.
Mm.
So what else have we got here? So yeah, profits are split in agreed proportions. Again, risk is shared. So in this case, the land seeker is not guaranteed a profit. They're not guaranteed any income. In fact, neither party is. But they're going to share those costs in accordance to what they've agreed. Where again, with the contract farming, they are guaranteed their monthly or quarterly or annual payment to deliver a service, and then they get motivated by a profit share. In this case, you only get the share of the outcome. That's it. Okay.
Mhm.
Um, I think from our like Fred and I's perspective, where we've used this the most, it's often quite nice as a short-term sort of tester of a relationship. Maybe you don't want to pay an agent to do an agreement. Maybe you have a lot of trust with a party and you just want to start, getting involved in a relationship. That's great. From a legal perspective, I understand that often works, but you've got to be comfortable that if it goes wrong, you won't have a legal agreement behind it, which is the argument for doing the legwork.
Yeah.
Can I just ask a question on that? Harry, you mentioned you need to have a lot of careful oversight. Could you just give a little bit more detail on what you mean by that exactly? Maybe just even talking about what could go wrong
Yeah.
legally.
Okay. So what you like I said, it's incredibly simple in terms of the parties are coming together. We've agreed you do this, Fred does that, and then at the end of it, you split the output in this fashion. Effectively, that's not too dissimilar to a legal trading structure, a legal trading partnership. Okay. So you could, if the relationship soured, one party might actually say, well, wait a second here. We've got a trading partnership. Therefore, we're governed by the Partnership Act. And you can't just dissolve a partnership without going through a requisite process. So in a sort of undesirable case, for example, from a landholder's perspective, they've put their land forward into what they thought was a share farming agreement. It's actually been construed as a partnership. That partner now has a legal right to the partnership asset, which is the land. Partnerships are really hard to dissolve and can become really contentious, particularly where you don't have a written partnership agreement.
That's really
Good,
useful.
good
Thanks.
question. Good question.
Good to have more detail on that.
Okay, joint ventures. This is a bit of a catch-all, but really what we're talking about here is setting up a business together, right? That business could be a partnership, like we've alluded to, but here we're thinking about limited companies or limited liability partnerships. Effectively, you co-own it, you run it like any other business, and parties can invest, they make a commitment, they contribute in different ways. And this can be an incredibly helpful vehicle, particularly like we're saying, where there's a product that we're selling. Maybe it's a value add idea, or maybe we're trying to really scale. Maybe we want investors to come in the future. You can't. It's more difficult to have an investor in a tenancy type structure than potentially like a limited company. But as we allude to in the second to last point there, you still, as a landholder, if you had a company that you're co-owning with a third party, you would still need a legal structure to tie the land to the company. So normally a tenancy in that case. Um, Again, word of warning, these can be amazing, but every structure needs to be fit for purpose. You've got to think, well, if this doesn't work out, and this is year one that we've jumped into this, we only just met these guys 3 months ago, pulled together a plan. Again, a bit like setting up a legal partnership by mistake. You've suddenly got all this company law, all of these tax liabilities, and you have to go through a liquidation process. If that's not set out very carefully, you could end up with unintended consequences.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, this must be my favorite and most underutilized area of of sort of legal partnerships. So we are, of course, talking about a tenancy. We have two types of tenancy law applying to agricultural land in this country. We have the Agricultural Holdings Act, which was a tenancy legislation that came in 1986. Effectively, you guys aren't going to come across that unless you are already a holder of those, because they aren't created from now going forward. So if you meet the requisite tests, you will be creating a farm business tenancy. So, well, what is a tenancy? So a tenancy is where a tenant has exclusive possession of a premises for a term with due consideration. Okay, so let's unwrap that. You have exclusive possession. Nobody can come onto your land to tell you what to do without your permission. Okay, there's a nuance to that. Rights can be reserved by the parties. So I might have a right as a landowner to access my land in order to repair a water pipe underneath it, for example. But the principle is that as long as I as a tenant am not doing anything wrong. I'm entitled to quiet and peaceful enjoyment of my premises. Okay. So in this case, the tenant is running their own business and is in control of the land within the parameters of the tenancy. But to create a farm business tenancy, it must be primarily or wholly agricultural. Okay. If it was commercial or residential, then that would be governed by entirely different law. But as long as it's primarily agricultural, you can have residential or commercial components within that. Okay. The old legislation was extremely prescriptive. You couldn't really contract out of much. It was all this quite complicated, but actually quite genius legislation that still exists today, but not for new agreements. What we have is pretty much freedom of contract. So when people quote you their template and tell you it's not negotiable, they're lying. They just don't want to think out the box, right? That said, it's not complete freedom of contract. So this is where it does warrant having expert advice. Otherwise, things can be entered into that create undesirable effects. We have a question from Juliet. When you say primarily agricultural, do you mean in terms of financial terms or area of land or something else? No, we mean in terms of sort of the character and the operations going on over the land. So you might have a 10-acre field being farmed, but actually 1 acre of that might have a house and a commercial business that turns over 10 times the amount of income. Because of the character of that would be considered a farm. It's kind of that logic test to some degree. Does it look like a farm? Does it act like a farm? Does it do farming? Okay, yeah, great. Then that's probably a farm. So I don't know if that answers the question exactly.
There's just another question as well, which is from Sam. With the FBT, if it's primarily agricultural, but the tenant was a CIC or it was charitable, is this complex or is it doable?
It's very much doable. Doing agriculture is not about earning money from it. It's about actually the form of production, and doing it with an intention to earn money. Whether you actually do or not is a different question. But yeah, you are right. There is a level of complexity here because you are generating a new legal entity, a CIC. So the question is, well, what is the CIC doing? Is the CIC's purposes agricultural in their nature, and does that align with the permitted use of the tenancy? So these things need to meet up. I've seen it in some cases where that's not being thought about that carefully, and yes, it can create issues. But we certainly encourage CICs being able to occupy land. So within that permitted use, just to dive into that a little bit more, often the permitted use is for agriculture, right? But if it's a charity that also wants to educate people and do horticultural therapy, for example, that permitted use cannot just be agriculture. It needs to state what other things the charity is going to do. Otherwise, when the CIC or charity starts doing that, they're going to be breaching their lease. Okay, hopefully that answers that question. I love it. Good bit of nuance. So again, the way that the legislation sets out farm business tenancies is that if they have a term of under 2 years, that term will automatically end at the end of it. So if you have a term of 2 years, at the end of it, it's just going to end. If it's a day longer than 2 years, it will roll automatically year to year. And one party needs to give a minimum of 12 months notice to terminate it. So it's like an automatic renewal right, if you like. And you can give up to 2 years, but it's a minimum of a year. So 12 to 24 months notice. But beyond that term, there's very limited security of tenure. So it's important to think about what you actually want. Landowners have often very generic comments from agents. I think the average farm business tenancy in the UK is about 3.5 years. Well, as all of you will be well aware, if you're setting up a business that partners with nature and is trying to restore habitats and regenerate communities, that just really ain't going to do it. You're not probably going to be investing your time and energy and money into that landscape with full conviction. So it encourages practices that are fairly destructive to our dear planet. Again, I love the flexibility behind the rent. There is a statutory rent review sort of provision, but it's basically market rent. What do others pay in the area? But there is a lot of nuance to that, and there is the ability to write whatever formula you want. So the rent can be fixed. It can go up every 3 years. It can be fixed to the grain price. It can be profit share orientated, at least to a degree, but there has to be some sort of rent, even if it is a literal peppercorn. Without that, it's not a tenancy. Again, repairs, responsibilities for repairs, insurance, etc., can be agreed however you like, but in the absence of you agreeing stuff, the legislation will step in. Okay. I think the important thing also to say is, regardless of whether you've written it down or not, over any form of these forms of partnership that we're talking about, there is law that will determine what that actually is. Okay. So you can say you've created a contract farming agreement if you are trying to appease HMRC from an inheritance tax position. But actually, if the facts state it's a farm business tenancy, it's a farm business tenancy. And I could geek out, but maybe I will. There's a wonderful piece of case law where Lord Templeton in the 50s was asked about, someone was trying to convince him that they'd created a license and they wanted to therefore kick this person out, where actually they had created a tenancy. And he said, well, this four-pronged digging device, whilst you might call it a spade, it is in fact a four-pronged digging device, which therefore constitutes that it is a fork. So effectively, the facts of the case must be looked at regardless of what you call it. Okay.
Yeah.
Anything
Maybe
else on
just
that?
I guess if I could just make I guess a general comment with regards to something like responsibility for repairs, etc., that of course effectively goes for any type of agreement. Just make sure to agree on who does what, and that should go, in our perspective, in the heads of terms ahead of making the written legal agreement, right? So that's the pre-legal, plain English agreement, making sure that you're on the same page effectively. And
Yeah.
there's different tools that can be used for that. We have one that we like to call Archie, which is about who has responsibility and accountability for various aspects of what's going on the farm. But there can be other things used, of course, which is
Yeah.
proposed. We shared on our website as well.
Yeah. Download it for free. Thanks, Fred. And I think there's one of the most common questions I get asked when people are starting to step into negotiations is, oh, so what should the rent be? Or what should the contract fee be? Or what should the profit share be? And actually, the simple answer to this is it's got to work for everybody. So until you've understood the objectives of the parties, who's bringing what those heads of terms say, so the mechanics of the agreement, you can't possibly. And in our case, we also say we've got to have a financial plan, because if it doesn't matter what the rent is, if the tenant can't afford to pay it, then you've got yourself a failed relationship, right? So we actually reverse engineer that question and say, well, let's work everything else out. Then we'll see what's a fair way for the parties to come together and share the remuneration, regardless of what structure you're in.
Yeah.
Cool.
Should
Um,
we move on to the licenses? I know you can. I mean, Harry, I know
let's
you can
do it.
talk
Let's
about
do it. We could
tenancies
riff on
forever.
tenancies
Yeah.
forever, but I'm sure I'll somehow bring it into licenses as well.
Yeah.
Okay, I'll do it straight away. So with a tenancy, you have exclusive possession, right? A license is a right to do a certain thing. It's not an interest in property. So if you have a license to graze your animals over the landowner's land, for example, he can still walk all over it, dig water pipes, drive around the place, set up a campsite on the weekend. Like he can do all of this. You are only, there's obviously nuance to that, but the point is that you can't be going, well, wait a second, this is my land. I have an interest in property. You don't. You have permission to do a certain thing, and that thing is whatever is written in the license for the duration of the license. So whilst you might think as a grazier, for example, looking to access some land, someone might offer you a grazing land, you might go, oh my gosh, this is not an interest in property. Someone can tell me to, can walk all over it and disturb my cattle. Yeah, well, wait a second here. This could actually work in your favor. You might not like the relationship and you can walk away very quickly. You can serve notice to terminate it really easily. Often because often the rates that you're paying are significantly less because you have less of a right. And that short-term flexibility can be really helpful to parties on both sides. So, but it obviously has its limitations if we're trying to form long-term relationships. Licenses, rule of thumb, should not be used without being reissued and having a break between them over, I like to say, a year, but in some cases people are comfortable with 2 years. But after that, you really should be thinking about whether you are in fact creating a tenancy and whether indeed that tenant has management control or not. That grazier license or has management control. So again, be aware, but don't assume it's a bad thing to use a license agreement. An example of where I think licenses could be really effective, we might have a grazing platform or an arable platform, and that could be from a landowner, could be rented by a tenant who's grazing the land. But the landowner might say, well, actually, is it not in everyone's interest to maybe plant some trees on this land? And maybe we'll have a walnut crop in 12 years' time. They might decide to sell a license in order to indeed establish and plant walnut trees, but actually more likely the landowner might have done it themselves and now they would sell the standing crop. So you could have a landowner, a tenant, and somebody who's buying the fruit or crop off those trees, and it's all working very nicely. In another case, you might run pastured poultry behind the cattle and offer a license, and the tenant or landowner could do it. So this is where it gets really fun, and we can start playing with these structures and stacking them on top of each other. But again, with complexity comes really the warning of getting the right professional advice to make sure it makes sense. Cool. I think.
Can I ask a question about licenses?
Yes.
Please.
Is there such thing as a long-term license? So if someone was doing that, setting poultry behind in a rotation, could you have a 10-year license for them to do that, or is that not a thing?
Technically, yes. Technically, you can, but we'd want to look at the facts of that and how it was actually going to work in practice, who was issuing the license, who was owning the cattle. Again, it's that piece of, is there an unintended consequence of creating a tenancy? But actually, if there's already a tenant and the chickens are only there part of the year, and there's certain things that gives the tenant the right to move them and interact with the management of them, so effectively retains management control, then yes, that could be sound. But again, it's that warning of don't just assume that you have a license because that sounded like the easiest way forward. You've got to keep your eye on whether the facts are going to change over the course of that relationship.
Thank you.
Sam, you will get the slides. Absolutely. Open source collaboration, for sure. As long as Cordelia is willing to circulate them.
It
I
sounds
believe
like
that was,
Very
I
much
believe that
planning
was the
to. Thank
plan.
you.
Perfect. Great. Is there, I mean, maybe it's like a question back to the floor. Is anybody at the point of starting to negotiate an agreement that wants to tell us a little bit about it, and maybe we can riff on where you've got to and see if we can support you or indeed just inspire others in the room. Time to pop your hands up. Don't do it all at once. Oh,
Well, I guess while people are warming up, maybe we can just briefly talk about um, other agreement structures because I mean, they could be relevant. We don't tend to um, use them very often in our agreements, but it is worth noting, I suppose.
yeah, 100%. I think they are they require thought and consideration, um, but can be incredibly powerful tools. Um, I mean, one case we've got a client that we've been helping that has set up a community interest company. So by virtue of that, it's a company structure for the community's benefit, and they have then granted them a tenancy of some space so the community can come in and grow and generate allotments and community growing projects, etc. Well, you might say, well, why didn't the landowner just sort of open their gates and let people in? Well, actually, by doing it this way, the community interest company has been able to access funding to support projects on the land. And it also takes the landowner a little bit out of the position of control and responsibility and kind of hands it over to the community. So that's really cool. Then there was the talk of like, well, wait a second, might we now sublet from the community interest company to a commercial grower who would rent some of that land back? And then we say, oh, well, and then maybe add some polytunnels and, really invest in a new water system. And these sort of questions, and you sort of start playing it out in your mind and you start realizing, well, wait a second, how is this actually going to work? Because it sounds great when we just talk about it, but we're really sort of encouraging you to say, like, this might be the best solution, but you've got to think about, I'm always the like, guys, I want to be super positive, but also what's the worst case scenario? What does it look like when it all goes wrong? Because if we come into agreements understanding what happens when it all goes wrong, then we have clarity on what we're actually agreeing. And the best legal agreements are the ones that you just put in the bottom drawer and they're never looked at because the parties have such clarity on what they agreed that they never need it. Yeah, Fred, I probably digressed a little bit off the initial comment. I thought it
Loved
was
it.
helpful
I
to just
mean,
chuck a little example in there.
as you can hear, Harry is one of the most passionate people around legal agreements. Just as if we were talking about spreadsheets, I might be on fire. But maybe it's worth just giving a little note on cooperatives as well. It's not
Mm,
something you see that often, but they can be incredibly powerful. Being being born and bred Danish, I'm biased towards cooperative. That's how I mean, the farming industry in Denmark is all organized effectively mostly on cooperatives, right? So there's some fairly big benefits of this. It's easy to buy in and out as a as a as a as a as a as a farming operation, regardless of your structure, really, whether you are a limited or whatever, you become a unit, a co-member of this cooperative, and they're often, um, the purpose is often to market something together or, share a certain infrastructure piece. There can be many different things. I'm sure you're familiar with some of the, let's say, livestock marketing cooperatives that exist in the UK as well, right? But so there are many benefits of, getting to scale effectively, getting to the benefits of economies of scale. Even if you are sort of smaller, you can do that together, and you can pool resources in many quite efficient ways. Some of the downsides that might be at play um, would be sometimes a bit of a lack of ownership in this because it uh, is a democratic entity, effectively, the cooperative, and so um, you are losing control effectively of some part of what you're doing. You are also you need to have someone who's really passionate and leading a leading figure of this. Otherwise, you might get into a situation where the management of that cooperative can be a little bit left-handed, so to speak, and can be a little bit lackluster just because it's not the priority for most of the members is they all have their own business. So when something's on fire, put out their own fire first, of course, which does make sense. But it's just something to watch out for, make sure that the governance structure is set up really well and with people who really care about the mission.
Yeah, I think you're right. I mean, the forward planning that you need for co-ops and community interest companies is generally a lot more than these other slightly more linear legal structures. But I will just say I'm convinced that we can unlock so much value in British agriculture through cooperatives.
Yes.
Um, fundamentally, France does it really well. Denmark does it really well. There's lots of amazing examples, but for some reason, British farmers cannot collaborate, at least to date. I think it's some sort of idea about like looking over your fence and like not wanting to share why you're doing better than the other, or anyway, something around pride. But I think I get a sense that we might have a few growers in the room from some of the comments that were being shared. I think that, for example, if you guys are setting up smallish market gardens, I think it's so insane that you get into growing to grow amazing high quality food, but then you have all of the administration of a small business, which in itself can be a lot. You also then have to find your markets for a fresh product. And then you have to, actually sell to them. Then you also have to, often deliver it. And like in any other industry, these are broken down into entirely different management teams. Yet as small growers, you're doing it all. So if we can start collaborating as teams of farms, you might have 10 market gardens within a couple of hours of driving, and we can pool our resources and actually start saying, well, you know what, Fred, you're going to do our spreadsheets and help us with that. Cordelia, like you're going to help us with the marketing and the sales relationships. Okay, Steph, you're going to drive the delivery van once a week, and then, I'll drive it one day, Juliet, Sam, and then we can start collaborating like that. I think we can unlock so much value within our supply chains, because ultimately, otherwise, we're really struggling and we're seeing a lot of market gardens that aren't succeeding. And I think this is a lot of the reason for that.
Yeah. Um, and I think just to say that there's just come out a new cooperative in Denmark doing exactly that, what you just mentioned, like literally on the news today, Harry, which is it's quite a good development. Yeah, first of its kind at least in the modern days.
Mm. Yeah, so it is there's a lot of us really trying to think about how to help you guys who are actually doing the most honorable profession in the world do it. So if we can help you guys and give you some, a webinar or some free resources, or indeed some, further advice at any point, we would love to do so. In the meantime, we are doing some radical thinking and joining up with amazing organizations like Land Match England. You guys have done such great work, and you fill so many of the gaps that we can't possibly fill. That one-to-one time, that being on the ground, that pricing structure, or their lack of, is just amazing. We, on the other hand, are not a charity. We are a commercial enterprise, so we do charge. But we're trying to bring value in different ways. I'd also just give a little shout out to Pitch Up and Grow, if you're familiar with them or not. The third sort of relevant land matching business in England. Again, we're all having conversations together. They have skills we don't, and vice versa. And we want to lead by example. We're collaborating. We want you guys to collaborate too. I think it can unlock a lot of potential on your land. Just do it in a way that thinks long term, but also tests things short term. I think what I mean by that is like, hey, look, we're talking about life and relationships with each other like we want to be in business for 20 years. But actually, let's not necessarily sign a 20-year contract without a get out of jail free card on day one. So that might be like, oh, well, why don't you employ me for year one, and then maybe I'll invest in your business? Or, why don't I give you a 20-year tenancy, but actually there's a break clause that allows you to get out after year one if it just doesn't work. These kind of things, it's sort of like we want the vision, but we also need to be pragmatic enough to know that it's okay for it not to work, and life's too short to hold on to things that aren't right.
definitely. Just wanted to open up for questions before we I suppose go a little bit into a summary of the different kinds, just to make sure we have some memory glue. Because we talked about a lot of things, and Harry is quite passionate about, not that I'm not passionate, but you can tell the difference. He's on fire. So maybe we just talk, Harry, a little bit about sort of a summary on each, right? So when is something appropriate, right? So in summary, employment is quite useful. It doesn't have to be that, okay? But we shouldn't write it off effectively, is the main point. We shouldn't write employment off as a type of structure that works for a partnership, and especially in the beginning. This has been the case many times that someone has been hired for the first year or so, and then to get to know each other. And there's effectively it constitutes a get out of jail free card on both sides. Of course, complying with the law. Um, yeah, and contract farming agreement. This is not surprisingly not too far away. It's like the first big step away from employment and onto an actual partnership where you have a separate P&L settlement every year, and you still, as a land seeker or operator or contractor, you could call it in this case, you still have typically some guaranteed income in the form of a contractor's fee that can be higher or lower depending on your agreement. And obviously, if you have a lower, kind of fixed fee that you're getting every month or quarter or however you agree, then you typically have a larger profit share upside, right? So you can, there's, as Harry has so keenly described, there is actually quite a bit of flexibility in that. So we tend to use it fairly often, even for things that go beyond your typical beef, dairy, etc. type of agreement. Share farming tend to be, it's your sharing of resources and then splitting at the door effectively. So you are in many cases, at least in the past, it has been a bit more informal and there's been a lot of trust involved. We definitely encourage to write things down. Um, and joint venture, this is where you go into business together uh, in terms of a special purpose vehicle, effectively, what you would call it, which it can be the implications of that can be both good and bad. The upside is, of course, you have a very clean set of records for that, and the investability is really good because an investor knows exactly what's the structure that they're investing into, and it works really well, especially if you have a product. Let's say you're making kombucha or whatever you're making, or a value-added product that has a degree of scalability, then this works really well often.
But remembering that you would normally still need a tenancy to that joint venture entity,
Yes.
unless the joint venture entity actually buys the land or the underlying asset, which of course now we're talking about companies owning assets.
Yeah. Or if the let's say the processing facility, if we just call it that, whatever you're making, is located elsewhere, and it just buys the produce of the farming activity, right? That is also possible. Um, cool. And then of course tenancy and licenses. It's also appropriate, and Harry had went through it in quite good detail, but effectively it gives you the right to do mostly as you please as a land seeker under some conditions, of course, and there's also some flexibility, but it is governed by a different set of law. Um,
And really, from a land owner's perspective, landholder, they're getting a fixed return mostly. I mean, yes, we can think out the box, but mostly they get a fixed return. It's the least risk for them. All of the business operational risk sits on the land seeker.
So this hopefully should work a little bit of like a memory glue of sorts, so just as a wrap up. And yeah, I think the best idea is just to open up for questions. And Harry, as you mentioned, if there's anyone right now thinking about what structure to pick, we're more than open to just elaborate and discuss it live as well. I see some questions as well. Juliet has a question. Can a tenant with an FBT be part of a cooperative, or is it the landowner? Harry, do you want to go with that one?
Yeah, I mean, I think again, like more information would be helpful, but just to illustrate that, yes, like a tenant farmer like Arla is a cooperative, and they are members of Arla, and that's really just about buying and processing milk in that case. So, are you talking about the tenant itself being the cooperative? Or, I mean, if you could just give a little bit more information, Juliet, either message or just unmute yourself and chip in if you're feeling up to it.
No, it was just a general question. Just a thought. I hadn't thought of Arla, in fairness, because that is an obvious one.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, if you want to set up a cooperative on land, the landowner could put the land forward as an asset for the cooperative, I believe. But I think that would be a very yeah, you'd need to take some very careful legal advice on that. The more likely thing is that the landowner leases land to a cooperative that operates on it. But then the other element of that would be that there are numerous farmers joining a cooperative that isn't on the land. It's helping with, say, supply chain management, for example. So I think it's about understanding what that function is and then designing the structure to work within that sort of context.
Yeah, thanks, Harry.
It's a pleasure.
I might just come back on Steph's question. In the chat, Steph asked, what was the agreement between two of the Groundswell panelists, Tom and Adrian, who we were on a panel with last week, who were speaking about their agreement, because that was more about a landowner primarily wanting engagement and people on the land in quotations. So Tom and Adrian, they had uh, a rental, a tenancy agreement. However, it was a peppercorn rent for the first few years. So they had agreed that for the first, I believe it was 3 years, I could be wrong. They had a very low rent, and then it was agreed to rise after that. Yeah. Yes, it's an interesting point. Thinking about mainly wanting people on the land. I know that Harry had mentioned other agreements might be favourable towards that too. So I'm sure they could have explored different sorts of agreements, but yeah, it was a tenancy.
Yeah, I mean, it's a beautiful example of how flexible tenancies are. And when you start thinking about forms of capital, in this case, the landowner clearly was able to articulate that it was more important that there were people creating a social atmosphere, a community on the land, and producing food. And I'm imagining that they were trying to restore the ecosystem. In that case, instead of them doing it themselves, and then sort of paying people to come on, they've gone, well, do you know what? We just won't charge you for the first few years, aside from that peppercorn, which I did mention is essential to create the tenancy. Another example I like to give around this kind of out the box thinking is I have a client who's fortunate enough to own a wonderful estate down in Dorset. And we were negotiating a 35-year FBT. And when it came to sort of understanding the terms that we wanted to put on the table, we went back to her holistic context and we'd worked through the framework. And it became very clear that whether they paid, 80 or £100 an acre made absolutely no difference to the estate in terms of the objectives that they were trying to fulfill. So we said, well, wait a second, we could do something cool with that, because the biggest objective of the estate was to increase the resilience of the estate, sequester as much carbon, build biology, etc. We said, okay, well, if we soil test every 5 years and the tenant can demonstrate that they've increased soil carbon across the holding as a single, factor, because that will drive all the other good stuff that we wanted to be happening, well, we'll just decrease your rent for the next 5 years. So we came up with that really cool multiplier that they didn't ask for it. We said we're not going to tell you how to farm. we're going to incentivize you because we know they're very driven by money and that they're very innovative. And as a result, would you know it, the relationship is blossoming because they have understood each other's objectives better now.
Yeah, that's a great example. Really good. I have another question. I feel like I have a lot, but also thinking about all the people that we're working with as well. Um, we hear a lot that share farming is really common in New Zealand for some reason and not here. And I wonder, do you have any insights on why that is?
Um, well, they're pretty good at collaborating for a start, but I also believe that it's actually what we would call contract farming,
Ah,
I believe, but haven't spent that much time looking into it. But it's somewhere in my mind that somebody who has came back and said, well, they're great at collaborating, but actually it's contract farming, what we would call. But a different culture, different use of language, right?
yeah, absolutely. Oh, that makes sense. I wondered whether it was a potential untapped. People speak about it as if it might be an untapped potential, like you were describing cooperatives, but perhaps not.
I
No,
think
I think there is
no
potential there.
question.
Yeah.
There's no question. It's huge potential for more collaboration, and I think the more organizations such ourselves, and including Land Match England, of course, and PitchUp, etc., the more focus is directed in the direction of collaboration. Uh, we're gonna uncover that the value and like the this it's greater than the sum of the parts, effectively, is what I'm trying to say. And I think there's so much more potential. When we started out, even discussing what what is land matching a while back, um, most people that we talked to were not that interested in collaborating and farm partnerships as they are today, where it's a much bigger topic. And I think just the fact of having different organizations that are working towards the same vision as such is helping a lot and opening people's eyes. Oh, actually, I could do this. It would make sense for me. Um, so
Mm.
I really think there's a big untapped potential in sharing the risk and reward effectively amongst people. It doesn't make sense that everyone has to carry all the weight on their shoulder, and also that they should potentially extract too much of the value gain as well. Let's say a more equitable distribution of risk and reward is it probably is very sensible.
And again, thinking about that risk and reward, not just in monetary terms. There's
Yeah.
another land match that we're just coming towards we're about to sort of do the agreement for. It's going to be it's a fairly small farm, stacked enterprise model. We've modeled out all the economics over 5 years. We've looked at and gone, are you guys happy to see that you're actually not going to make very much money and you're probably going to be working really hard, but you're going to be regenerating an ecosystem, building a farm community, your children are going to be raised on this farm landscape, etc. And they looked at it and went, yeah, because we're not doing this for money. We're doing this because we love it and we want this quality of life. So actually, if you can look at this through those different lenses, you can really start to understand, well, why are we doing this in the first place? Because if that equation is not shared out properly, something is going to pay the cost of it. It's either going to be the relationship, it's going to be the health of the person that's having to work harder than any other just to make it the finances work because there isn't enough money in it. Or, as we've been seeing for the last hundreds of years, our soil pays the price because people start farming extractively.
Mm.
So it's all about balance. So I think my biggest takeaway for this, because I'm seeing the time and we are getting towards the end, don't start with what agreement do I want? Start with who am I and what do I want my life to look like? Then find somebody that aligns with that and that has the things that you're missing. Think about that in terms of other forms of capital. Then look at what agreement fits that relationship.
Wonderful.
You didn't mention the spreadsheet. Come on.
I was leaving it for you, Fred, man.
Just
Oh, thank
stick
you.
the economics in there somewhere in the
Yeah.
process.
It will all balance out. Wonderful. I feel like that's an amazing note to end on. I want to just give anyone the chance to ask one more question if you have one, but otherwise it feels like you might have got a really comprehensive overview already. Yeah, and that's absolutely wonderful. Great. Thanks, Miranda, for a thumbs up. All good. Yes, lots to think about indeed. Great. I will be requesting these guys to share their slides with me, and I'll circulate them around afterwards, as well as some useful links, how to find everyone's websites. Great. Oh, nice to see some nice comments in the chat. It's really wonderful to just be in the room with everyone, but everyone watching back as well on the recording. Thanks so much for taking the time. Yeah,
And
great.
thank you
Any last words
guys.
from you guys? Thanks.
I just want to thank you guys for doing such an honorable profession. It's not easy. It's so important, and we need more of you. Thank you.
Well
Wonderful.
said.
All right. I'll close up the room now. Thanks so much, everyone.
Yeah.
Bye now.
Okay.